I had an experience last week, that got me thinking about this. I'm a professor, and so I was teaching my students. I'm teaching a group class, and I was teaching, students about, how we facilitate groups and, information that's important to know in starting a group and whatnot. And, some of the comments that I received, it reminded me of when I first started out in the field and when I first started out in school, learning about this process, right? And so it was just kind of like, you know, some of the comments the students had provided were like, I make it look like it's so easy to do. And yet when you get into the nitty gritty stuff and read about how much work is really behind the scenes of putting a group together, there is a lot that goes into it. But being in the field for so long and running groups for as long as I have been, it's more second nature because I've had the experience and have been doing it for a while, and that's what I shared with them. And so it just kind of, opened up this idea to me that, there's lots of ways that we kind of know information, right? And oftentimes we don't really recognize some of the process that goes into this. And it really is kind of like this pendulum. There's, these parts that we can explain things about how we know information. And then there's this other side of this, um, pendulum where we can't explain things about how we know things, and so that's kind of what I wanted to just talk about and kind of see what your experience have been like with this as well, and where you see yourself or how you describe some of these things in your own life. But on the screen you see here these different ways of knowing, and keep in mind, this is not like everything. There might be other things that I have not thought about that exist that are not up here. And by all means, please, share those if there is something missing, but on the reality side, the very objective side, we have, cold, hard science facts, right? These are things that we could prove. These are things that, science has been able to give us evidence for, right? And we could go about proving it. Like, I talk about having anxiety, and I can prove that. There's a DSM that goes about talking about if you have these symptoms, then you have anxiety. And some of us, I have anxiety anyways. I mean, anxiety is a natural human experience, even in a lot of the clinical approaches and theoretical approaches in psychology and counseling. They talk about anxiety as being a part of the human experience. And it becomes more of a clinical aspect when it starts to impede in a person's life and gets in the way of being able to function. And so when we have science and facts that back that up, that we could prove these things, based on research, based on evidence, based on, repeated experiments, that kind of a thing, that's how we know that there is some validity, right, to it. Okay. So that's kind of the science and the facts. There's experiments, there's patterns that we look at. And then nature, even in nature, there's science in nature that we look at for facts. Nature has some really great observable things that, we look at to kind of even gauge how we may do things. Like, here in Chicago, we have 4 seasons. Well, sometimes we have 4 seasons, but we kind of have 4 seasons. And so we know that there's going to be this period of transition where things are going to get a little colder, or things are going to get a little warmer. We're going to expect some snow. We're going to expect more heat. And of course, now with climate change and whatnot, and the seasons being a little bit different, that we're still looking into how that's going to affect things. But even looking towards nature for kind of what's going on and what kind of patterns exist gives us some information about how we can explain things. We see those kinds of things. And this is just information of how we know, right? We look at experiments, we look at research, we look at patterns, we look at nature. Then we have information, right? So this is like printed material, This is the internet where a lot of people get, not saying that all of it's true, of course, but looking at, word of mouth, like if you're looking for recipes, for example, this is still information, or things that people have tried. If there's like do-it-yourself projects, or, like finding a snake somewhere, or whatever the case may be. What do you do? What kind of snake is it? I don't know. Let's look it up. Or maybe somebody knows. Word of mouth. People have this kind of information. And then other resources that people may have access to, that can provide that. So you might have like radio, or different podcasts, or different databases, or things of that nature that give you information. And again, it's not saying that information is always going to be accurate, or it's going to be what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to be proven, but there is information, and it comes from credible resources that perhaps can give some sort of validity to what that information is. So that's another source or way of knowing, right? And so, as I was like teaching this course, this is like stuff that this is where this stuff is coming from in teaching about group. There's research about this, about the content. There's also information out there, because there's different people that have done different things, have run different groups. They have printed material. There's word of mouth. People have expressed different types of groups that they've run. And these are all things that have been shared. And then, of course, there's experience and stories. And this is also a way that we know stuff, right? Our own experiences from the past and the present. And then also other people's experience lets us know about things. We don't always give validity to our own experience. And I think that's one of the biggest things that occurs a lot of time, is that we don't always believe that what we experience or how we experience something is real. And as a clinician, that's one of the things that I always talk about with people that I work with, is that, if you're experiencing it, then it's your experience. Nobody can deny that you're experiencing it, right? Because that's you, that's your perception. And the idea with it is recognizing what is factoring into that experience, right? And then other people may also have a similar experience. And then there's a collective story, right? So there might be shared experiences that occur, which also gives a way of knowing too that, oh, somebody else has shared this experience, or someone has information, right, based on their experience, that they can help me understand maybe a little bit more. So there's a different way of knowing something. And then also, from past experience, we have our own story. We have present experiences too that may relate to our past. And, I'm a big believer in that sometimes there are things that kind of creep up that we may not necessarily be conscious of, but yet may be present. And just kind of being aware of that. So I don't know if so far, if anybody can relate or see some of these ways of knowing in their own experience. If anybody wants to share or has a question about it, maybe. Then I'm going to go to the one that I really wanted to talk about. So this is the one I really want to talk about. This is the one that most people cannot explain. This intuitive kind of way of knowing. And I thought this was an interesting way of knowing. And I did a little research on what's out there. There's so much research out there, right? And lots of different ways that it's labeled, quote unquote. It goes by different names depending on what circle you're looking at, or what field you're going by. But it's known as inner wisdom. It's also known as a gut experience. Some people call it like, you just kind of get a sense of something. Like you can't describe it, right? You just kind of know. Um, and it's kind of like a hunch or a feeling. And I know that I've had experiences like that where, how that I just kind of knew something was going to happen and then it did. And it was like, oh, okay, that was kind of creepy and weird at the same time. And yet it was quite exciting just to kind of know that it was going to happen. And be able to prepare for it and to know how it was going to unfold in a certain way. Not obviously to the degree that it happens in reality, because reality is always different, but have some sort of preparation for it. But this is also, a lot of times in the literature and in some of the research, it transcends logic, right? So we can't explain it through a rational sense, because it doesn't seem logical. And so there's some, different ways of working that too. It's also a way that people have described it as being a connection, whether that be to a deeper inner resource or to a deeper or more expansive outer resource. Some people call it spiritual. Some people call it transcendent. Some people call it universal. I mean, it really depends on the field or the subject that you are referring it to. But I think intuition is something that all of us have. Everybody has this. And as kids, we all have this. A lot of times what happens is that, growing up, whatever culture, in Western culture and American culture, it's a little bit different because it is very much, there's a lot of stress that gets in the way, right? And that is one of the things that tends to cover up our intuition. We're taught not to necessarily follow our instinct, right? And in a lot of different circles, there's been a relationship between intuition and instinct. This kind of like, you kind of get a feeling about something, and it's like, oh, one of the things that I've observed is, whenever I have like this kind of tension that I experience, that's a cue for myself, a bodily awareness that, yeah, okay, maybe not. That's probably not a good thing for me then. If this is my body is tensing up, it's letting me know that this is probably not going to be a positive thing for me. And so I've become more trusting of it, especially more recently. And it's really made a big difference, in my life, and really changed quite a lot of how I've operated, as well. I'm curious about other people's experience with this sense of inner wisdom or a gut feeling or intuition or however you may word it. Has anybody else ever had these experiences or?
Serena, it's Judy.
Hi.
Um, Hi. I think I'm getting much better at it. I think
Oh,
there's been a couple times in my life where I literally went against my gut
yeah.
and it really messed things up. An example is coming home to take care of my dad. Took the closest job, and I was literally having not an anxiety attack, but I was like, oh my God, I don't think I can do this from California to Orlando. And I'm sitting there and I asked my mom, are you sure you need me here? And she's like, yes, I do. And I took the job and it was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I got injured and I just I've gotten better at it because I think you start paying attention when you mess up. And
Yeah.
that was my experience.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, just kind of what happens when you go against that kind of gut feeling, right? That you're just like, ooh, I knew I
Right.
knew that, right?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
yeah, and it tends to then just kind of remind you that, ooh, I had a feeling that this was not something to do. And then when you go against that, like you said, something happens and then you get reminded of it. And I'm curious, has anyone else had that experience before where you had kind of like this reaction about, ooh, and then you went against it? I know I've done that a few times where, I went against my gut reaction and it didn't turn out quite well, of course. And then that's also a reason why I've become more trusting of it too. Like, okay, if you're telling me this, I'm listening, kind of a thing. I'm wondering if anyone else has had that experience.
Yeah, I'm currently having that. Something upcoming and just my intuition. And so then it's caused me to reflect, okay, why am I feeling it? Actually, I think it's based on my experience too.
Okay.
With experience, then I'm thinking, well, this could go really wrong because it has in the past. So I should probably be going with my gut on this.
Okay. So kind of just like a situation where in your past experiences, it didn't work out so well. And so your intuition is telling you this may not play out well for you either.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So kind of following that kind of hunch, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else want to share? Okay. So yeah, there's lots of different examples, that we have about like these experiences that occur in our life. And again, going back to our experiences, we can't always like prove our experiences because we don't necessarily have concrete evidence for it, and yet we do. And I think this is part of that kind of dichotomy of it is that, our own life is proof of its existence, right? And so our experiences and our patterns and things that we've gone through is proof enough that we've gone through them. We have these experiences, as we get older. I mean, as a kid, of course, you're having limited experience, but yet as we get older, we've accumulated life experience. And so, just by kind of going through that, there's different things that we can look at to kind of get an idea and connect some dots about how things work in our life. And I know like when I've done this for myself, that's really been an eye opener for me in terms of really kind of honing in on my own intuition and finding that inner resource. That's another term for this kind of unexplainable way of knowing. It's not really logical, and yet it is. It's not really provable, and yet it is. It's not really something that I could put concretely, and yet I can by my own experience because it's something that in my life and it's something that it's shown up in my life over and over again. So how is it that one person can go about developing their own intuition? This is something, especially nowadays, I've been hearing and seeing that a lot of people are wanting to develop more of this kind of practice, that we're kind of getting and going or flowing or moving in this direction where people are wanting to kind of trust themselves a little bit more. And so these are some things that I do. And have done in terms of my own intuition. These are things, that also, and I have a slide of some um, resources also that have talked a little bit more about these different things to do. Um, but, really kind of looking at these different pieces to develop one's own inner wisdom or intuition, and kind of being able to trust the gut, so to speak, or what that little tiny voice says, and everybody experiences it to some degree. I mean, I know when I was visiting spiritual places, going to ashrams before the pandemic, these were things that have happened, and it was quite an experience. And being able, though, to follow some of these practices and have these experiences have been important. And so picking back up on that, is something that has helped with developing my intuition. So meditation, of course, is one practice. One of the things that happens with meditation is that, the mind is very scattered, right? Research actually has demonstrated that we have, over 65,000 thoughts a day. And this is, cognitively. So these are unconscious and conscious thoughts that we have, running around in our mind. So think about like 65,000 voices in your head, just chattering away. And so it's scattered, thinking about things you may have to do, about, insecurities, doubts, the future, the past, memories, reflections, all kinds of thoughts that we have going on. And so what meditation does is that, a lot of people have the conception that meditation, you clear all these thoughts out, and that's not what meditation is meant for. Meditation is really meant to help you focus energy and focus the mind. That's what mindfulness is really about, is that you are focused on one thing. Usually it's the breath. And in yoga, as a former yoga instructor, that was part of that practice, is that is really what yoga is about, is unifying the breath and the body and the mind through the breath. Is that the breath allows the mind to calm down, and it brings the mind to focus on the breath and the body. And so when that happens, there's a much more focused intention. And what happens for a lot of people, and I know this has happened for me in my meditation practice, before the pandemic and during the pandemic, in the early part of the pandemic, is that, when I was in focused meditation, it allowed my focus to be very clear and open up that intuition that I had. So the meditation does allow us to focus and to concentrate our energy. And a lot of people think, that you need to sit in like, this kind of yoga style yogi practice. And that's not really meant, not everybody can do that. So there's lots of different modes of yoga, or I'm sorry, of meditation that exist. So, but just realize that, meditation in some form is meant to help focus the mind, and breath is one way of doing it. Trusting is another way of kind of developing intuition. It's really about trusting just kind of the process. And that's a really huge thing to try to do, because anytime process is like this long-term thing, and, lots of patience is involved, but it really is just allowing it to unfold as it unfolds. So, looking at how do you trust your relationships? How do you trust certain things? Those things take time. And so intuition is no different. It's a different relationship that you're developing with yourself, right? With that inner wisdom, with your own sense of, however you want to term that. But that's part of this developing intuition or wisdom, is that you're trusting that that's going to happen by being patient and allowing it to happen. Journaling is another thing. Writing out thoughts sometimes also helps to clear out some of the space that thoughts can take up in our mind. So putting it on paper, being able to come back to those thoughts. And, I put down later in this, pattern awareness, that's important. And it's also research oriented in facts, but there's a different caveat with that too. But journaling is also a way of kind of developing intuition, because it allows you to kind of see things and observe. Observation is very important. And that's part of what meditation and journaling allow us to do. Reflection, is also part of developing intuition. So being able to reflect on different pieces of our experiences, being able to reflect on what's important, being able to just reflect on day-to-day life, It's not, with intuition, it really is not just about tasks, right? It is a process. So it is about being in the world, so to speak. There's an existential piece to it. And that's the reflection part, is this kind of inner voice that allows that to be heard, so to speak. Pattern awareness is, really about synchronicities. It's really looking at different patterns. This is something that I've noticed in my life, through my years, is that there have been patterns. And so I have trusted that. And so when I notice that, there's a saying that I heard that, once is random, twice is coincident, three times it's a pattern. And so, when I've heard that, it was like, oh, that's interesting. And I've actually seen that happen, so like I pay attention to things that come up, like words or occurrences or different things, like if I hear the word simple twice in a day, or it comes up in an article I'm reading or a podcast or in conversation, I might pay more attention to that because there may be some meaning or an intuitive sense to it that it's coming. It's a synchronicity that's occurring. That's part of intuition too, that there is something being drawn out with that. So that's a pattern awareness, is kind of looking at things that are happening in synchronicity. A lot of people may have the belief that things don't happen for no reason, kind of a thing. And there are people that believe that things are very random, and that may also be the case. But from an intuitive standpoint, we're really looking at, okay, what is the pattern with this? And some of you had mentioned, when you don't listen to that voice, then that's when, sometimes things go the opposite way. And then finally, paying attention to body sensations. The body really knows, and there's lots of research that also points to this as well. But paying attention to kind of like, some people experience kind of like those spidey senses, and that's a message. Your body picks up on things even before you consciously know what it's about. And that's something that I've noticed, especially having a chronic pain condition, is that my body will be different. And I pay attention to those subtle differences because it lets me know when something is different. But paying attention to how your body responds and looking at sensations can also help you kind of develop your intuition. Maybe in certain situations, you notice that your body's tingling, or maybe you tense up when when your intuition is telling you that something is not going to feel okay. Those are kind of things to pay attention to. So I hope that was helpful about, ways of knowing and kind of how to develop more of this unexplainable way of knowing. I don't know if anybody has any comments. I know we got about a minute before we wrap up, but I wanted just to kind of check in and see if anybody had anything they wanted to share. Here are some references that are used for this. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Serena. It was a very useful session, as always. Will this have a third part coming in 2 weeks on 8th July? Or is this a concluding for this particular topic?
We'll find out.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But we will probably have a session on July 8th. I think we'll be able to do that.
Great. All right, then. Thanks all for watching and listening, and to all participants in the call today. Have a great rest of the evening. Bye.
All right, bye. Thanks, everyone.